I came home from a 12-hour shift running a construction crew in 90-degree heat, my boots still caked with red clay, the kind that sticks to everything and turns to brick once it dries. My shirt clung to my back like wet wallpaper, and the only thing on my mind was cracking open a cold beer from the ancient Frigidaire on the porch and letting the lake breeze wash the day off me. The dock my grandfather built in 1978 stretched out into the water like an old friend's handshake, solid, familiar, waiting. Instead, I rounded the corner of the house and stopped dead. 23 strangers had turned those weathered planks into their personal resort. Jet skis bobbed at the cleats like they'd grown there. Coolers the size of coffins hissed open every few seconds. A portable grill smoked beside a pile of inflatable unicorns, flamingos, and one ridiculous swan the size of a rowboat. A woman in a bright blue polo, badge pinned to her chest reading Lakeside Meadows HOA president, stood at the center directing traffic with the calm certainty of a traffic cop on holiday, clipboard in one hand, walkie-talkie in the other. I knew every inch of that dock the way a man knows the lines in his own palm. Every knot, every splinter, every place where the wood had cupped from decades of sun and rain. 3 generations of Harlans had learned to swim there, my father teaching me to cast a line before I could spell my name, my grandfather showing me how to tie a bowline with hands that smelled of pine tar and coffee. It was private land, marked by iron pins my father drove in himself with a sledgehammer and a level, pins that had rusted but never moved. And yet here was Susan Grant telling a circle of parents that the HOA bylaws, voted in 3 years ago by a quorum of 7 people in somebody's basement over store-bought cookies and Folgers, granted every resident shared waterfront rights. She waved her phone like it held the deed to the lake itself, sunlight flashing off the rhinestone case that probably cost more than my first truck. I planted my boots at the head of the dock, mud flaking off in chunks, and asked, as politely as a man can after a day of swinging a hammer and yelling over diesel engines, for everyone to leave. Susan laughed the way people do when they think the joke is on you, a sharp bark that cut through the chatter. You don't understand how community associations work, Mr. Harlan. My name is David Harlan, and I understood plenty. I understood that the county tax map in my back pocket, folded so many times it was soft as cloth, showed a clean line between my lot and the public launch 200 yards downshore. I understood that no vote, no matter how loud or how many times it was repeated at potlucks, could erase a boundary set in 1978 when Jimmy Carter was president. Gas cost 63 cents a gallon, and my grandmother still hung laundry on a line that ran from the oak to the corner of the garage. She kept talking about democracy, about children denied recreation, about the tragic optics of one man hoarding a resource meant for all, while parents nodded along like dashboard dogs and kids kept cannonballing off the diving board my uncle had bolted on in 1985 with aircraft-grade aluminum and a drill that sounded like a jet engine. I started taking pictures. License plates from 3 counties, coolers with college stickers, the HOA badge glinting in the sun, a toddler in water wings clutching a juice box on my Adirondack chair, the one my wife sanded and stained the summer before cancer took her. Susan's smile never slipped, but her eyes went cold, the color of lake water in February when the bays go deep and the herons stand like statues. The paperwork is being processed, she said, which is lawyer speak for I've got nothing. When I asked for one scrap of proof right then and there, the dock went quiet enough to hear the water slap the pilings, a loon call somewhere out past the buoy line, and the faint tick of the grill cooling down. That was the first crack in her armor, a hairline fracture you could almost hear. The second came the next morning at 8 sharp, when a convoy of white SUVs rolled into my gravel parking pad like a funeral procession that had taken a wrong turn at the Baptist church. Susan stepped out in a hard hat the color of a construction cone and an orange safety vest 2 sizes too big, 5 volunteers trailing behind with clipboards, caution tape, and a drone the size of a turkey vulture. They strung yellow tape across my steps like it was a crime scene, hammered a sign that read unsafe structure, do not enter into the soft ground beside my hydrangeas, the ones my mother planted the year I started kindergarten. They sprayed chalk lines across boards that had held my weight since I was 10 and still smelled faintly of the creosote Granddad brushed on every spring with a paintbrush older than I was. A folding table appeared with an admission clipboard, a cash box that clinked with quarters, and a hand-lettered sign. Suggested donation $10 PR family for Community Water Safety Fund. I walked out in yesterday's jeans and the same muddy boots, asked what in Sam Hill was going on. Susan adjusted her laminated incident commander badge, the plastic squeaking against her polo, and informed me the HOA was conducting an emergency safety assessment. Out of an abundance of caution, the dock is closed to individual use until certified compliant with updated community standards. Translation: she had escalated from party crasher to stage manager of a full-blown occupation. Behind her, a man in wraparound sunglasses launched the drone. It buzzed overhead like an angry hornet, red light blinking, dipping low enough to ruffle the American flag I fly off the end peg. Another volunteer unrolled a tape measure and began counting nail pops as if the dock were a crime scene and every loose board a smoking gun. I dialed the sheriff's non-emergency line while Susan lectured a growing crowd about my obstructionist attitude and the tragic precedent of one resident endangering children for the sake of ego. 2 deputies arrived in a cruiser that still smelled of new vinyl, took one look at the tax map I handed over, and asked Susan for documentation. She scrolled, stammered, finally admitted the easement was under council review with the state regulatory board. The sergeant, a man I'd coached Little League with 20 years ago, was kind but firm. No paper, no authority. Pack it up. The bounce house deflated like Susan's ego, a slow wheeze that ended with a sad flap of nylon. Parents demanded refunds while volunteers peeled caution tape off my railings, leaving sticky residue that took me an hour with goo gone, a putty knife, and language my grandmother would have washed out with soap. You'd think that would end it. People like Susan don't back down. They reload, and they reload dirty. 3 days later, my phone lit up with notifications at 6:30 in the morning, before I'd even poured coffee or let the dog out. A neighborhood Facebook post, carefully cropped photos of sad children in soggy swimsuits, my silhouette arms crossed like a cartoon villain, declared local resident denies kids water access. Comments poured in from strangers calling me selfish, unneighborly, a hoarder of lakefront, a man who would let toddlers drown rather than share a few planks of wood. By noon, the barista at the coffee shop, a girl who'd babysat my nephew, set my cup down without meeting my eyes and slid it across the counter like it might bite her. The hardware store clerk rang up my deck screws without the usual joke about my eternal repair projects. That night, I found footprints in the mud beside the dock, size 10 Nikes with a waffle tread, beer cans tucked under the azaleas like Easter eggs, and a half-eaten bag of Cheetos ground into the decking so deep the orange dust looked like rust. Someone spray-painted hoarder across my mailbox in dripping red letters that ran in the humidity like blood, the paint still tacky when I touched it at midnight. I installed motion-activated cameras with infrared and cloud backup, the kind we use on job sites to catch copper thieves. The next evening, they caught Susan and a real estate agent in a navy blazer measuring the dock at dawn, voices clear as church bells through enhanced audio. Once we force the sale, Waterfront Premium pushes $200K over market. My commission alone pays the Ben's lease for 3 years and gets me out of that split-level nightmare. The agent hesitated, glancing toward my dark windows where the curtains didn't twitch. Susan cut her off. Trust me, I always get what I want. He'll crack. They always do. The puzzle clicked like a deadbolt sliding home. Susan owed 80 grand in casino debt from weekends in Biloxi, the kind of debt that comes with phone calls at 3 a.m. and envelopes marked final notice. Divorce papers still bled red ink from a settlement that left her with the house, the minivan, and the bills. She had tried to buy my lot 2 years earlier at fire sale price, offered me $420 when the comp sat at $650 and rising. I'd said no and meant it, polite but final, the way you close a door you don't intend to open again. The HOA presidency was her crowbar, her skeleton key, her battering ram. Every fake violation notice for an unapproved bird feeder, every GoFundMe for a community dock, with photos of sad children I didn't recognize, every midnight trespasser leaving cigarette butts and broken bottle glass was pressure meant to crack me open and spill the land into her pocket like coins from a broken piggy bank. I waited, the way you wait for a storm you can smell coming. On a Tuesday, she showed up with a well-dressed couple in their 50s, promising them dock privileges included in HOA fees, a reserved boat slip come July 4th, and sunset views that would make their friends in Charlotte weep with envy. I stepped outside in my work boots, handed them a laminated plat map with a QR code to the county GIS, and watched their faces cycle from confusion to fury faster than a summer squall. Susan's pitch cracked mid-sentence like ice on a puddle in March. The husband pulled out his phone, dialed his own attorney right there on my driveway, and told Susan in a voice that could freeze bourbon that he would be reporting her to the state real estate commission before lunch and copying the local paper. The couple left tire tracks in my gravel deep enough to plant tomatoes and a promise to sue for fraudulent inducement, intentional misrepresentation, and whatever else their lawyer could dream up before happy hour. Saturday, she went nuclear, the kind of nuclear that leaves a crater. Diesel engines growled at 7 a.m., shaking the windows in their frames and setting off every dog within a mile. Food trucks backed onto my grass, tires chewing divots I'd spend weeks receding. A DJ erected refrigerator-sized speakers that thumped bass you could feel in your molars and your spleen. A ticket booth charged $25 a family for the first annual Lakeside Meadows Waterfront Festival, complete with wristbands, a snow cone machine that dripped cherry syrup like blood, and a banner that read fun for all ages in letters tall enough to read from the public launch. A local radio station van parked beside the bounce house. A perky morning host interviewed Susan live about inclusive waterfront equity, while kids lined up for face painting and parents snapped selfies with the lake as backdrop. I backed my pickup to block the dock steps, the tailgate kissing the first plank, flipped on the lawn sprinklers set to oscillate on the highest pressure, and reached for the air horn we use on job sites to signal lunch or incoming crane loads. Cold water sheeted across picnic blankets in a glittering arc that caught the morning sun like diamonds. The horn blasted every time a sandal crossed the yellow line I'd painted the night before with exterior latex, a roller, and a steady hand guided by 30 years of laying out foundation lines. Parents scrambled, clutching toddlers and coolers. The DJ shielded equipment with a tarp that flapped like a sail in a hurricane. A Channel 7 news van rolled in just as Susan screamed, "You cannot shut down a sanctioned event. This is abuse of process, harassment, and I will have you arrested." The reporter, a woman I recognized from the 6 o'clock broadcast who once covered my nephew's state championship base tournament, asked for proof of ownership. I pointed to the plat map, zip-tied to a sawhorse with cable ties strong enough to hold rebar. Susan's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No paper appeared, only excuses that wilted faster than lettuce in July. The festival collapsed in 10 minutes flat, a house of cards in a wind tunnel. Refunds were demanded at the ticket table. One father, a contractor I'd bid against last year, waved a soggy 20 in Susan's face and told her exactly where she could stick her community spirit, using words that would make a sailor blush. Food trucks fled, tires spitting gravel that pinged off my truck like hail. The bounce house sagged like a punctured lung, its unicorn face drooping in defeat, the blower coughing its last. Susan stood soaked and shaking in the middle of my lawn, mascara tracking down her cheeks in black rivers that pooled in the collar of her event coordinator t-shirt, promising noise complaints, liens, county grievances, and a lawsuit that would bury me in paperwork until I begged for mercy. The camera caught every word, every wild gesture, every tear that looked less like remorse and more like rage at a script gone wrong. By Sunday, the clip, Susan Grant's Meltdown, had 500,000 views, a remix with club beats circulating on TikTok, and a hashtag #DocKaren trending in 3 states. The dominoes fell faster than a house of cards in a hurricane, each one louder than the last. Former victims posted screenshots of fake fines for unapproved mailbox colors. Mine was apparently non-conforming taupe, forged letters threatening foreclosure over imaginary architectural violations like a birdbath placed 2 inches left of center, pool party scams that pocketed gate fees, while Susan sipped margaritas in a cabana she didn't own and charged extra for premium cabana seating. The HOA board called an emergency audit in the community center that smelled of lemon polish and old coffee. They found 15 grand funneled into Susan's personal accounts through a PayPal link disguised as a maintenance fund, complete with a fake logo and a sob story about storm damage that never happened. Their lawyer issued a statement on stationery so thick it could stop a bullet. The association had zero jurisdiction over private docs, always had, always would. Susan was suspended pending investigation, her login credentials revoked before she finished her latte at the drive-thru Starbucks. She showed up to the next board meeting in a navy suit that cost more than my first truck, briefcase stuffed with internet templates she'd paid a paralegal $50 to pretty up with fake letterhead and a notary seal lifted from a public form. When the real attorney, a woman who'd clerked for the state Supreme Court, reminded her she'd been stripped of authority, Susan swept papers to the floor and shrieked. The community deserves this doc. You'll take it over my cold, dead body. Parents hustled crying children out. Someone whispered for a welfare check. The board voted unanimously to dissolve the HOA and ban Susan from all future activities. One member, a retired school principal named Margaret who taught my son in 3rd grade, stood up and told Susan to her face that she had shamed every volunteer who ever served coffee at a bake sale or folded programs for the Christmas pageant. Criminal charges followed like thunder after lightning: theft by deception, harassment, fraudulent misrepresentation, criminal trespass, and a half-dozen lesser counts the prosecutor tacked on for good measure. Civil suits piled on like cordwood. I filed for $50,000 in damages for emotional distress, property damage, and the cost of replacing every board her volunteers had chalk-marked. The judge granted a 500-foot restraining order and tacked on court costs that made Susan's eyes water when she heard the total. Susan's employer, an insurance firm where she'd adjusted claims for 7 years and once bragged about denying a widow's roof claim, cut her loose the day the story hit the evening news, citing conduct that brings disrepute upon the brand, in a press release that read like a corporate eulogy. Her house went on the market at a 20% discount and still sat empty, the for sale sign leaning like a drunk after teenagers used it for target practice with a pellet gun and a 6-pack of cheap beer. One gray morning in early November, the kind where the lake steams and the geese fly low, she walked up my driveway alone, hair unwashed and graying at the roots, shoulders folded in like a broken umbrella left in the rain. I've lost everything, she whispered through chattering teeth that had nothing to do with the cold. Job, house, my son moved out to live with his dad in Atlanta. Can we settle this quietly? I'll sign anything, pay anything, just make it stop. I told her actions have consequences, that she'd had a dozen chances to ask instead of steal, to knock instead of kick the door down, to be a neighbor instead of a conqueror. She cried on my doorstep until the tears ran dry and the wind off the lake turned them to salt on her cheeks, then shuffled back to a life that no longer fit, her shadow stretching long and thin across the gravel like a lie that wouldn't die. 18 months probation, $25,000 in restitution paid in installments that left her eating ramen and driving a dented Civic, 200 hours cleaning public boat ramps in a neon vest that read community payback across the back in letters visible from the interstate. Mandatory counseling twice a week with a therapist who specialized in narcissistic collapse and once treated a city councilman who thought stop signs were suggestions. The judge called it a cautionary tale and ordered Susan to read the transcript of her own meltdown aloud in open court, her voice cracking on every "you can't" and "I have authority," until the bailiff handed her a box of tissues. Law schools added the case to property rights curricula under the heading, "When Enthusiasm Meets Larceny." Neighbors formed a voluntary lake committee with ironclad rules. No activity on private land without written consent recorded at the county clerk, every dime accounted for in public ledgers updated monthly on a Google sheet anyone could audit from their phone with a password changed every quarter. But the story didn't end with the gavel or the neon vest or the therapist's couch. It kept rippling outward like rings from a skipped stone, each circle wider and louder than the last. The first ripple hit the county planning office when 3 other lakefront owners filed complaints about identical safety inspections Susan had orchestrated before targeting me. Their docks, smaller, older, less valuable, had been tagged with the same yellow tape, the same chalk X's that looked like scars. One widow, Evelyn Carter, age 78 with hands gnarled from arthritis and a voice like wind chimes, showed me a forged letter claiming her late husband had signed away riparian rights in 1992 while on his deathbed. The signature was Susan's own handwriting, practiced on the back of an HOA newsletter beside doodles of dollar signs. The second ripple reached the state attorney general in Nashville. A junior investigator named Patel, fresh out of Vanderbilt with a ponytail and a laptop full of spreadsheets, saw the viral clip and recognized the pattern from a seminar on HOA fraud taught by a retired FBI agent. She subpoenaed Susan's bank records and found transfers to an offshore account registered to a shell company in Delaware with a mailing address that turned out to be a mailbox in a strip mall beside a vape shop. The money trail led to a Biloxi casino host who testified under oath that Susan had comped rooms, show tickets, and prime rib buffets in exchange for promising future real estate kickbacks once she secured the Harlan parcel. The casino settled out of court for an undisclosed sum that paid Evelyn's legal bills, bought her a new roof with architectural shingles, and funded a scholarship for the high school journalism program. The third ripple changed the neighborhood forever, the way a flood changes a riverbed. Bobby Williams, the retired Marine who lived next door and still mowed his lawn in perfect diagonals, organized a Saturday work party that started at 7 with coffee from the Baptist church and ended at dusk with ribs from the pit behind the fire station. 20 neighbors showed up with pressure washers, stain, and a cooler of sweet tea strong enough to float a horseshoe. We replaced every board Susan's volunteers had chalk-marked, sanded the railings smooth enough to slide a credit card along, and hung a hand-carved sign at the top of the steps. Harlan Family Doc, EST. 1978, permission required. The letters burned in with a woodbinning kit my nephew got for Christmas. Margaret the principal brought deviled eggs with paprika sprinkled in the shape of a smile, and a notarized letter granting any resident the right to fish from the end peg if they asked me in person, left no trash, and told me a joke worth repeating. We signed it in front of a notary who charged us $10, a slice of peach pie, and the promise to fix his leaking gutter next spring. The fourth ripple was quieter but cut deepest, the kind of cut that doesn't bleed until you move. Susan's son, Tyler, 17 and lanky with his mother's eyes and his father's stubborn chin, knocked on my door one December evening holding a manila envelope thick as a phone book. Inside were printouts of every harassing text his mother had sent from burner phones bought at the truck stop, every doctored photo with my face pasted onto a Scrooge cartoon, every venomous voicemail left at 2 a.m. that started with "You think you're better than us," and ended with threats I won't repeat in polite company. "She made me drive the spray paint car," he said, voice cracking like thin ice. I didn't know it was wrong until the news, until kids at school started calling me Doc Boy. I poured him a Coke, sat him on the porch glider that creaks in the same spot it did when I was his age, and listened while he told me about the divorce, the gambling, the nights she came home smelling of smoke and desperation and locked herself in the bathroom with a bottle of Pinot and a stack of losing scratch-offs. He moved to Atlanta the next week with a duffel bag and a bus ticket, but he mails me a postcard every birthday with a new fishing lure tied to the corner and a note that says, "Thanks for not hating me." The fifth ripple arrived in the form of a certified letter from the IRS, the kind that makes your stomach drop like a skipped heartbeat. Susan's offshore account triggered a full audit that lasted 6 months and involved 3 agents and windbreakers who drank coffee black and asked questions like surgeons. They found unreported income from dock rental fees, collected in cash and stuffed in a lockbox under her bed, fake charitable deductions for the GoFundMe that bought her a new patio set instead of a community dock, and a paper trail of cash withdrawals at casino ATMs timestamped at 3:17 a.m. on nights when the moon was full and her luck was not. The tax bill topped $40,000 before penalties and interest. She sold her diamond tennis bracelet at a pawn shop on the interstate to make the first payment and walked out with a receipt and a look that said she'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. The sixth ripple washed up on the shores of local politics like debris after a storm. The county commissioner who had once posed for photos at Susan's ribbon-cutting ceremonies for a new playground that never got built now distanced himself in campaign ads, promising transparency in community governance and an end to backroom deals. A challenger, a young mom who had paid $25 for a festival bracelet that got soaked and ruined her white jeans, ran on a platform of HOA reform and won by a landslide, her victory speech delivered from the same community center stage where Susan had once held court. Her first act in office was to sponsor a bill requiring every neighborhood association to file annual financial disclosures with the clerk of court, open to any resident with a library card and a suspicion. The both ripple came from an unexpected corner, the high school. Tyler's former guidance counselor, a woman who'd once suspended him for skipping algebra to fish, organized a senior project on civic responsibility that turned into a full-blown investigation. Students interviewed me on my dock at sunset, Evelyn in her kitchen over oatmeal cookies, Margaret in the library surrounded by yearbooks, even the DJ who had fled the festival with wet speakers and a story about the worst gig of his life. They produced a 20-minute documentary that won first place at the State Media Festival and second at Nationals. The closing shot lingered on my dock at golden hour, voiceover asking whether community is built on trust or on fear, on invitations or on invasions. It screened at the public library to a standing room-only crowd. Susan watched from the back row in a baseball cap pulled low and a hoodie 2 sizes too big, then slipped out before the lights came up and the applause started. The eighth ripple was the strangest of all, the kind that makes you wonder if the world has a sense of humor. A true crime podcast out of Nashville optioned the story for a 6-episode season. The host, a former prosecutor with a voice like bourbon over ice and a laugh that could charm a jury, spent 3 days on the lake, recording ambient water sounds, loon calls, and the creak of my dock at dawn. She interviewed the sheriff who'd shut down the fake inspection, the reporter who'd caught the meltdown, the casino host who'd flipped for immunity, and me on the condition that we fish while we talk. The episode dropped on a Friday and shot to number 3 on the charts within hours. Listeners flooded the neighborhood Facebook page, now moderated by Margaret with an iron cursor and a zero-tolerance policy for trolls, with messages of support and their own HOA horror stories. One woman in Oregon recognized Susan's tactics from a condo dispute in 2019 and sent me a box of saltwater taffy with a note, "Hold the line, brother. The tide always turns." The ninth ripple came full circle on a quiet Tuesday in April, the kind of day when the dogwoods bloom and the lake smells like pennies. A moving truck backed into Susan's old driveway, the one with the cracked basketball goal and the weeds growing through the concrete. The new owners, a young couple from Knoxville with a toddler and a golden retriever, asked if they could park on the street while they unloaded. I helped carry the crib and the grill, drank a beer on their new deck, and told them the short version of the story. They laughed in the right places, asked smart questions, and promised to bring potato salad to the next potluck. Their realtor, the same navy blazered agent who'd measured my dock at dawn, handed me a business card and said, "If you ever decide to sell, call me first. Waterfront like this doesn't come around twice." The 10th ripple was the lake itself, patient and ancient, giving back what it always had. Quiet mornings when the mist rises like steam from a coffee cup. Honest work that leaves you tired in the bones, but satisfied in the soul. And the solid feel of planks laid by a man who believed property lines were promises you kept with your neighbors, not weapons you wielded against them. Susan Grant's name became shorthand for every overreach we now prevent with a single sentence in the new guidelines, carved into a cedar plaque beside the mailbox. "Show me the document, or step off the wood." 6 months later, I stood on the dock at sunset, coffee cooling in my hand, watching my nephew cast his first lure without coaching. The cork bobber plopped, circles spreading like gossip that finally settled into truth. Across the water, Bobby Williams raised his mug in silent salute. Kids swam at the public beach downshore, parents waved when they passed my buoy line, and nobody asked for a key to a gate that never existed. Mrs. Dorothy Palmer watered her geraniums and called out that the potluck was Saturday if I brought the same peach cobbler that won the blue ribbon in 22 and still made grown men lie about their cholesterol. The lake kept its own counsel, lapping gently against pilings older than most marriages, older than credit scores and viral videos, and the sound of a woman's voice cracking on the word authority. Truth has a way of reasserting itself when the noise dies down, the way water finds its level no matter how many dams you build. Susan Grant learned that the hard way, and the rest of us learned it the easy way, over coffee and cobbler and the quiet satisfaction of a line held firm. So tell me in the comments, have you ever watched a bully wrap themselves in the flag of community, only to see the cloth tear when the truth walked in wearing work boots and carrying a tax map? Where do you draw the line between sharing and stealing, between leadership and manipulation, between standing your ground and digging a trench? When does compromise become surrender? And when does stubbornness become principle? Stand up, speak plain, and let the algorithm carry your voice farther than any HOA president ever could.